All right, welcome everyone. Day 3. My puppy was sitting right behind me and I just rolled over his little foot. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry. All right. So as normal, we'll give a couple extra minutes for people to settle in here before we get running. Maybe put what you are working on in the chat. So I'm working on promptstuff.us. Put a link if you want people to check it out. Especially if you're working on any agent-related stuff. We'll be talking about agents today, so that's very topical. But yeah, put whatever your company is, whatever AI projects you're working on, feel free to drop it in the chat here. Let me open that up. I think it should be working. So let me put mine. I also just launched this really simple note-taking app, just like for a weekend project. If you guys want to check it out. Are people able to type in the chat? I never know with these things. Let's see. Everyone can chat with everyone. Yes, everyone can chat with everyone. Cool. Awesome. Bias, University of Applied Science in Vienna, working on Gen AI infrastructure for teaching and learning. Yeah, teaching and learning is a really interesting place where all this goes to, right? Like, how do we think about educating students, young people going forward about these things, especially when things are moving so quickly. Um, you know, I've talked to companies before, and I feel like it's almost should be like someone's position to just be on top of these things and try them out, try different models, try different tools. Read the most recent research paper, and like I think that would actually that's kind of what my job is to a degree. And I see the value it brings to our company and other folks, and I think that actually could be something that's really helpful for other companies to adopt as well. Floor said evaluating agentic tools for automating marketing, sales, and recruitment processes. Nice. So some like internal workflows. That's great. Give one more minute. Can't believe it's already the last day. Let's see. Now the university stakeholder deliberation. That's pretty cool. Reminds me of the stakeholder deliberation reminds me of the multi-persona prompting. So there's a template and prompt up for this where you basically out of the model take on a variety of different personas, but it's all in like one message. So it's all one model doing it, but you could break it up. Suzanne's building a chatbot for crisis situations in IO Stack where prompting is super important. Yeah, prompting for any chatbot is really important, or agent. It's kind of hard to tell where the line between chatbot and agent is. Like if a chatbot has tools, does that make it an agent? Kind of. But we'll talk more about that today. Cool. All right. Well, we'll get things started here. Day 3. This is fun. So first, thanks to everyone again for being here. This has been a lot of fun. I love doing this stuff. So today we'll be talking a lot about agents, and we'll talk about kind of deploying prompts to production in general. And so after today, I will take all the videos and they'll get uploaded. So you'll probably get an email maybe tomorrow, maybe today, depending how things go. But those will be coming soon. It'll be uploaded to YouTube. You'll get a link to it. And then yeah, as normal, feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm going to pull that up on my end, or excuse me, in the Q&A. If you have like a specific question, the Q&A is easier. And just looking at your message, Raj, mentoring students to work on open source apps using a natural emphasis on low cost or no cost models. In terms of like low cost models, I guess it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, we integrate with Llama and stuff through AWS, so that you can have your own Llama instance, and even like some of the newer models. I don't even know what the cheapest model from OpenAI is anymore because it's like not the oldest model isn't the cheapest, which is interesting. But O3 Mini is getting like very cheap. A lot of them are getting really cheap. So I don't know if that's sort of like what you're talking about in terms of low cost. I know there's a lot lower cost ones like fireworks and stuff. But yeah, we can talk more about that later, Raj. And Steve, let's see. Yeah, the 2 days don't, the day one and day two don't really build on this. So if you're just coming in today, that should be fine. So again, today, a computer and then a PromptHub account. So if you don't have PromptHub account, go to prompthub.us and get up and running there. And that's all you'll need today. Obviously, you can use the free plan, which has a lot of generous limits there. And again, so PromptHub badges will be supported probably starting next week. So you registered, which you've already done that if you're here, attend a session, and then your library just needs to have a couple prompts in it based on what we've looked at. So today we'll talk about test cases and evaluations. So how to like kind of think about evaluating your prompts. We'll look at how to write prompts for AI agents. We'll look at a specific AI agent, one that I use a lot called Bolt.new, if you're familiar with it. It's like a coding agent. We'll look at OpenAI's Agents SDK and their new responses API and the kind of differences and what this kind of means for like, I would say going forward this year. We'll look at Anthropic's model context protocol. And we actually won't probably have enough time for this last section, but there's some blog posts we could share there. So it'll be relatively technical today, but we'll package it up in a way that's easy to understand. And again, our goal, let's get better outputs by test cases, evaluations, agents, so on and so forth. And so we'll start with test cases. And so test cases essentially are a way to test your prompt for performance and consistency. So you want to test your prompt across a variety of test cases. So if I'm, doing a sentiment analyzer or product feedback, I might have 5 different test cases that are different types of feedback. So maybe one says, I love the product. I hate the product. The product is okay. So these are all different like inputs that are going to be injected into those, those variables in the prompt. And you want these, it would be cool to have these automated. It's okay to just run them like continuously. So for that example, having those 5 test cases for my sentiment analyzer, like I have those loaded in PromptHub, so that's good to go, or whatever tool that you use. And you can kind of come back, you can tweak the prompt, run it, see if it's passing, kind of so on and so forth. And the recordings have not been shared yet, but they will tomorrow. Thanks, Tobias. So in terms of test cases, I think starting by creating by hand makes a lot of sense. So as we're kind of just running through an example in my head, right? Like we have a prompt that's going to basically analyze product feedback. So I might make a couple of test cases where, yeah, I love the product, I hate the product. Those are pretty easy ones. And then we might start to think of more complex ones like, I like the product, but I wish it could do X, Y, and Z. And you want to really start to think about edge cases because if you're going to be deploying this to production, people are going to be inputting all sorts of weird things that you couldn't even imagine into your prompts, right? Like that's typical for a production environment. It's not going to be cookie cutter. I love this product or I hate this product. It's going to be weird things where it's ambiguous or it's completely irrelevant, or it can be contradictory information. It's like, I love this product, but I also hate how it feels. It's like, is that positive or is that negative? So you want to kind of start to think through some of these edge cases and add them to in PromptHub, it's a data set, right? The data set contains test cases. And so you want to have like kind of a really robust set that you can test your prompt against that reflects kind of usage. You can do this using an LLM, of course, that's with everything. We always look to lean on that as much as we can. And we have a test case generator prompt you can use to do this. So there's a link to that. But you can kind of read through it here. So generate test cases for whatever your task description is. Has success criteria, which we're not going to talk about today, but we talked about in our blog post. It's success criteria basically just means, hey, I want to be accurate 80% of the times. It gives like a quantitative measure of, I want my conversational chatbot to, be giving factual information 99% of the time. So it's like, so you can kind of have like a North Star metric, and we touch on it on that blog post I just sent. But these test cases should have a mix, edge cases, negative cases, blah, 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 give a name, an input the model receive, an expected output, type of test. So you can kind of tweak this as well. There's examples in there. It's actually really useful one. And so to give you an example of once you start using these things in production, you'll want to start adding test cases based on what people are actually inputting to your prompt. Now that you have it out there, you see what people are using. And so under the logs tab for any project and prompt hub, you can see people who are running your prompt. And for example, for prompt generator, a lot of people will put random stuff in, like, because there's a task description input. So I can see what people are inputting, and we'll get a bunch of random stuff. We'll get test, we'll get the word, we'll get letters like L. And so this signals to me, okay, actually I need to go back to the prompt to think about, okay, how do we handle situations where it's really ambiguous, like just the character L, or if somebody's inputting test, we shouldn't try and create a prompt based on the description of test. At least I don't think so. Or it gives you a better idea of how to think about handling those kind of edge cases that you're seeing in the real world. Raj, how can we add images as part of the input? In the playground, there is a little icon to add images to your prompt. It's next to the variables one. When we open up we'll open up the prompt up in a little bit here, and we can look at it. But you'll see it. It's a little icon next to the variables text in the playground for project. And you can start small with test cases and expand them over time. So this is like the meta prompt data set that I have. We have 5, and I've been building this up over time. And so evaluations. So we are launching a new Evals feature this week. So that will be live on the platform if you want to check it out later on, to make things just a little bit more kind of easier. Right now, it's all done kind of via the eye test, which, I actually is not like a terrible place to start. I don't think it's a bad thing to have one person who's just really meticulous about testing these prompts and getting like a real sense of what the outputs look and feel like. But basically, evals provide a structured way to measure performance and to do it at scale. So I can correctly see how often does our classifier prompt actually correctly classify the feedback, because I'm going to compare it to what the output to what the answer should be. And so their evals are ongoing, and they're ongoing because things are constantly changing. Models change without us knowing underneath the hood. New models get released. So you want to have kind of a structured or objective standard of evaluations and test cases kind of go hand in hand to be able to come back and say, okay, now our evals are running at 85% versus 80%. And so it's a continuous thing. And so generally 4 parts of evaluation. There's, whatever the prompt that gets sent to the model. There's the output that the LLM generates. There's the golden answer, or otherwise we call it the target in prompt hub, which is the ideal or expected response. And then there is some kind of score. So it could be just saying, hey, does the output equal the target? Could do like cosine similarity, semantic similarity. Like there's a lot of different other ways to quantify how well the output aligns with the target answer. And when it comes to how you're actually running the evaluations, a couple of different ones. So you could think of code-based ones as like using regex or something along those lines, where it's like, hey, does this output contain this certain text that I'm looking for? And so those run really quickly. They're really fast to run. They're really efficient. There's human grading, where you have a human kind of come in and maybe do like by hand grading of the outputs. You can get like pretty in depth if you do that. Of course, it takes more time. And then there's LLM based grading, which is kind of in between the two, where you're using the intelligence of the model to do the evaluation. So it's not as fast as the code base, and it's not as rigid because it's non-deterministic, but you're applying high level intelligence like you would with human grading. And so that's all we're going to touch on for test cases and evals for now. As I mentioned, we're going to be launching a new evals product relatively soon, and so we'll have a blog post about that. We'll have more information. There'll be more videos to how to kind of you can get all of that set up. All right, now we'll move over to the really fun stuff here. So this is the agents portion of the webinar series. So from a high level, the general like core components of an agent, I would say, are memory, tools, and planning. Memory is essentially managing the context and the history. Since LLMs are naturally stateless, it's on you as the developer to send whatever the like previous message history is or whatever context you want it to have with each new request. So you have to manage that. And of course, that could be trouble as you start to hit up against context window limits. These are getting longer, but they also are not, I would say, super performant at like big scales. And so models going to become overwhelmed or kind of lose some of their value as the context window gets bigger too. So you need to be aware of that. Tools are probably like what really makes an agent an agent. So these allow the model to go out and do things outside of the system. So, excuse me, go get data from my database, or hey, write a email for me, or send a Slack message. Like these are the tools that you can enable for, the classic one is like, what's the weather? So like get the weather and return it back to the user based on whatever like country or city or country or state that they're in. So these what are really kind of make an agent an agent because it allows them to interact with external systems. And then there's planning. Long horizon multi-step planning is like really important for agents depending on the task that they're working on. And the reasoning models are good at laying out plans. I still think there is like some room for improvement and some room that you can make improvements to agents by having the planning a little bit more structured. And so the core principles of like prompt engineering, I would say, apply to when you're writing prompts for agents too. There are some like agent specific things which we'll touch on, but basically, keeping it simple is like the number one thing here. You want to have like clarity over complexity. The context is critical. You want to make sure whatever the agent you have has the right context to actually do the thing it needs to do, which sounds trivial, but it's actually harder than you might think, because you have to remember the agent knows nothing. The LLM knows nothing about your system. It has a bunch of knowledge about the world, but it knows nothing about your system. So you need to really put yourself in the shoes of the model, or like you can imagine like a human you're asking to do this task who's never worked with your backend before, never worked with your application before, and see like, okay, what context is really needed here. Being specific or it will always be better. And then with the same with any prompt engineering project, like testing and iterating is super important. We'll talk a little bit later about system messages and multi-agent and like how that kind of ties into the prompt engineering side of it, because that is important, but we'll just touch on that a little bit. And so we'll touch on a system prompt from Bolt. So Bolt.new is open source, which means the system prompt is open source. It's also available in prompt up here. So I'll drop the link to that. There's also a So this is a resource that we wrote recently that has a bunch of the information we'll be going over to about prompt engineering for agents. And once you're in here, you can go to the group that has all of the agent prompts that we have in prompt up. And so we're going to go through this a little bit. I forget how big it is. I think it's like 13,000 tokens. We can check this out real quick. All right. It was only 3,000. I must be thinking something else. By the way, Raj, here is the like image upload thing I was talking about before. So images also handles PDFs. We'll like parse that for you. So 3,000 tokens, that's good. The one for Klein, I think, is quite big, actually. Make sure we pull that up. There's a reason for this. So if you're not familiar with Klein, it's like another coding agent. I think it's a VS Code extension, so it lives inside the VS Code. Yeah, this one's like over 12,000. It's a huge system message. We'll jump into Bolt. So we'll look at a couple examples, but off the top, and like in the beginning of the system message, you'll see there's a lot of constraints that are set. So giving the model context about where it's at, what it can do. It's executed in the browser. There's no pip support. We can't install third-party things. Git's not available. So like it's a lot of information that's just like kind of centering the agent in terms of like what is and is not possible. It gives some really good information about code formatting and diff specs. And so, use two spaces for code indication. It tracks like user-made file or user-made file mods versus what is being done by the agent. And then it focuses on artifact creations. This is what it's kind of like the wording that they use for the like when generating code. So Bolt creates a single artifact for each project. The artifact contains everything. So the artifact is like the highest level component here. And so it has artifact info. You've seen XML being used. They use Claude underneath the hood as their model provider. So, or Anthropic, they use Claude 3.7 right now. But you'll see nicely laid out. We're getting XML. We're seeing a numbered list. We're seeing bulleted, like nested bulleted lists. And so it's all like formatted properly. They do some of this stuff, which, like, to be honest, like I'm not sure how effective it is. People seem to do it, but the important, ultra important, and it's like it makes sense why this would work, right? Like if the LLMs are trained on user data, like if you got something that said something was ultra important like this, you would probably give more attention to it. And so use valid markdowns. It's giving formatting guidance, which is very important. It must have been using HTML tags and it's like output, which is interesting. Think first. So this is kind of like chain of thought reasoning, having think first and reply with the artifact, blah, blah, blah. Don't be verbose. Something interesting, is a common kind of complaint is that the models can sometimes be too verbose, but then we also complain that it doesn't like complete the code. Sometimes it will say like, insert rest of code here. And it's like a funny thing because they're actually complete polar opposites, right? Like when we're coding, we want it to be very verbose, but when we're just talking to it, we don't want it to be verbose, but it's still just text generation at the end of the day. And so it's like a hard problem to square. So planning, context awareness, and order management. Again, there's more some like chain of thought kind of being baked in here of like, think about the whole project before doing anything, think about all the files, and like, how much do we need to do with this? Now that we have thinking models, it's like up in the air. But there's something that I built in from the ground up. Order of action is very important. Create a file before running a command that would execute it, so on and so forth. And so at a high level, define some really good constraints and environmental things up front. Some good like specific code formatting instructions, so like very hyper specific. A lot of like messaging around planning and thinking and things along those lines. The modular action sequencing, which you could see in like the Bolt artifact tags if you decide to check that out. And there's some safety and clarity guidelines set at the end as well. And we'll look at the client system message in a second here, but to touch on OpenAI's latest release of the responses API. So it's the first time they launched like a new API endpoint since a text-based one, at least since the assistance API, which was never made it out of beta, I don't think. I'm pretty confident in the responses API, and I'm pretty happy with like what they did. But basically, it combines some of the best features from chat completions and assistance API. Chat completions is almost over like 2 years old at this point. There's a couple of interesting things. It's really built, you can tell, for like agent related type of work, not just kind of chat, like messaging based work. Has built-in tools, so web search, file search, and computer use are built in from the ground up. Web search means you can go search the web. File search means you can search your vector store in OpenAI by passing like an ID. So you don't have to set up like an external like vector database if you don't want to. And then computer use is like their operator agent. So like you can go to websites, take tasks, whatever, control the computer. And they do position this as like the kind of what I would say will be the future endpoint for them. Chat completions is still going to be around, but the responses API will be a superset of what's in chat completions. So everything that's in chat completions is in responses, but not the other way around. And then they are sunsetting the assistance API. So a couple of interesting kind of side by side. And Kevin, in terms of your question, it is YAML? It might be. I forget. I didn't see the like formatting for those. So I have to double check Bolt system message there. But in terms of chat completions versus responses, so if you use chat completions before, and I know some people are working on chatbots, you would have to pass the whole, you have to manage this history array where you're passing in like the whole history of the conversation between your user and your assistant, and then appending the latest user message. And you can get like, you can try and do some caching and things along those lines and like whatever. And there's a lot of different ways to manage the context history, but it's manual at the end of the day. The assistance API is a little bit more automated, but there's a lot of reasons why the assistance API is great. But generally, this is how this was done with chat completion. So you have to pass all these, and then when there was a new response, this messages equals history, and you have to add on the new user message. Versus in the responses API, they have this previous response ID field, so you can pass along essentially what is like the whole history just by doing this. So it's really much more straightforward in that way. And someone noted to me that so the input is now what is typically referred to as the actually, is that in the next slide here? Yeah. So messages have been replaced with input. So this would be typically the messages array down here, right? Setting it equal to the history. Now it's input. And then instructions has replaced, well, instructions is basically the system message, but it's pulled out of the messages array. It used to be inside the messages array. Interesting, you can also provide a system message in here, but the instructions are outside of it. And this is actually pretty important because what you can do is you can take a whole conversation history and you can now pass it to a different agent. So we're going to kind of talk about this multi-agent stuff in a minute. Let's see if that's on the next page. Yeah, that might be easier to look at it that way. So we'll come back to this instructions being outside the message array in just a moment. So the new SDK, which they also launched last week, has a couple of like main things. So handoffs, guardrails, and there's observability and debugging. We're going to focus mostly on handoffs and what this kind of means for implementation. So what handoffs are is basically, imagine we have some like translation application of some sort. We can have we have some site and some people who come to our website speak Spanish, some people speak English. And we obviously want the agent to talk in whatever language it gets spoken to. So we could have a Spanish agent that speaks Spanish, English speaks English. But then above that, we have a triage agent. So you can think of the triage agent up top and then the two language agents beneath. And so the triage agent basically says hand off to the appropriate agent based on the language of the of the message or the response or whatever it is. And so the triage agent will see the message. If it says hola, it will pass it to it will hand off to the Spanish agent. And if it says hi, it'll pass off to the English agent. And so this underscores a few very important points. This allows you to have a lot more specific agents, which have more specific instructions. So thinking back to Bolt or like a typical code generation tool, you're like, what are you doing? What are the actions that you're taking? What are the tools that you have? It's like reading files, writing files, updating files, deleting files, managing state. But you can imagine you could break this up. Instead of having all of those jammed into the system message, which we see, we'll look at Klein here. Klein has basically done that, and that's why it's 13,000, 12,000 tokens, is because they have a bajillion tools. They have execute command, read file, write the file, replace in file, search files, list files. So there's all these tools in here, right? And these are tools that you do need, but it leads to these crazy big system messages. And like, honestly, once these things get too big, they become much less performant. So this goes back to like a principle we did talk about earlier in the week, which is that having singular functions for prompts is really important rather than these mega prompts that are like telling it to do a bajillion different things. And it's not that the models aren't smart enough, but just the chances that you contradict yourself, or give unclear instructions to use one tool versus the other, it gets higher with every additional token that you add. And so a world where you can keep the agents more specialized and smaller, you'll get better performance, it'll be easier to manage. And And that's also why the instructions being outside of the messages array is important, because I can basically, let's say for some reason the like language speak switched from English to Spanish. So maybe like someone was on my computer and they speak Spanish, and then halfway over, I come in, I take it over, I speak English. We could pass, the triage agent will see that I'm now talking in English. It can pass the whole conversation in the input, and then it will have the instructions for you only speak English. So we'll get you only speak English, and then we'll have all of the previous history of the conversation in the, where is it? In the input. So it lets you have the instructions be persistent, and at any point in time, you could swap out a different agent past the input, which is the message history, up to that point, and kind of keep running. So having it outside is like, I think, actually a pretty interesting change. It's actually how Anthropic does it as well. And so I think this type of setup is definitely like where we are going, and I think it's much more performant. I don't think you want a 12,000 word system message for your agent. I think you want something closer to bolts, which is probably could even be stripped down even smaller. You do potentially run into the having too many agents in like a multi-agent system setup and like things along those lines. I think starting with like being in like the 5 to 7 range, I think is good. Having over specialized could be potentially a drawback too, but that's something to test. But generally, I think this is the right direction to be going in. Cool. And the last thing we will touch on is Anthropic's Model Context Protocol, or MCP. So this came out in late November. It does feel like it's for some reason only like picking up steam now. There are some kind of rough edges to it that need to be worked out, and so it's getting better every day. But basically what it does is, taking a step back, if you want to build a chatbot that connects to Snowflake, Notion, Google Drive, all of the HubSpot, you'd historically need to create those integrations all by hand, and individually. And so, require all this like custom code. And if anyone who's built an integration, it's like very challenging and annoying, kind of across the board with LLMs. And so what this does, it creates a standard protocol for your client, your LLM application, something like Cursor or Windsurf or whatever app you're working on, to go talk to these tools, these external pieces of data, in a standard way. So they basically set up servers on their end. You have your client, and there's a protocol that lets them speak together. And what makes it easy to kind of make this happen quickly is that this standard we knows exactly the shape of the data. Everything is standardized. So once you build it once too, you can use it for any of them. So it enables access to maybe your proprietary database. You can set up your own servers for this. So yeah, you can have your own MCP server to connect to your internal database. You can connect to Notion, you can connect to Google Drive, things like that. It works with any model. So in the same way, actually, OpenAI's agent SDK is also model agnostic. This is model agnostic. And then how Anthropic describes it is the USB-C port for AI. So you can just plug into all these different data sources. And so another way is kind of thinking about how APIs allow us to kind of connect into other services or databases. MCP lets us tap into other tools and resources, and prompts as well. So on these servers, not only can I connect to Slack to retrieve all the data from a channel, but I can also see any of the tools that Slack has already built. So from a developer who's building these MCPs, you could set up a bunch of tools out of the box for your users to use as well. So not everyone is like recreating the same tools to write a message, send a message, update a database entry. So you could have those out of the box as well, which would be helpful for the clients, the clients building on top of this. So the servers, you can connect to data sources and expose them via a protocol. The clients, something like Cursor, we will query those servers dynamically to get data, run tools, so on and so forth. And yeah, the whole thing that makes this work is that it's all standardized. So we all know what it's supposed to look like, and everyone adheres to that standard, then it's easier to implement. And so here's another kind of visual. This is all coming from a really helpful YouTube video, which I will drop here. Oh, that's not a link. Second. There you go. And here's also our blog post on this stuff. Basically, you can imagine you have your application. Could be something like Cursor or something else different. And through a database MCP server, you can query and fetch, modify records, so on and so forth. So you can say, hey, go to my database and update an email in this column or add a new row for this new user. You can update stuff in your CRM, create new opportunities in HubSpot, track interactions, get data back from HubSpot saying, hey, we're like, what deals do I have that are in this certain stage or something along those lines, so on and so forth. So it's really limitless. And I think when you look at these like in context or in together, what we're seeing is from like an orchestration level, the agents SDK, and there are other agent SDKs to be fair, but having one from OpenAI is great. And that helps you with orchestration and the management of the agents. And then MCP help you to plug into different services, which are like necessary for LLMs, right? An LLM without having access to like any external data isn't super, it's great, but it's not like really powerful enough for like your application most likely. So you can use the SDK to orchestrate the conversation and the tool use and have multi-agents. You can use MCP to fetch account details. So in this case, we're building an agent for customer service. So we could have a multiple agent setup where we have like a general, a triage agent, and then one customer service agent that maybe handles the first interactions, one that does billing, one that does refunds, one that does like account lookups. We can use MCP to fetch account details from like our internal database, and then also maybe like Zendesk or other places. And then, we'll give a triage agent the autonomy to escalate or make the decision to resolve it itself. And so these things actually work really well in parallel or together. And that about does it. So in terms of today, we talked about kind of bringing these like test-driven design principles to prompting with test cases and evals. And again, we'll have some more stuff on this like really soon. I think it's pretty important to do these things. I think having someone do the eye test is pretty helpful, but having some more, making it easier to do these by having edge cases baked in. You create a data set of test cases to start. You can always fall back on those. You can add to them over time. And when prompt up, it's just a couple of clicks around those. And so it's really easy to see, hey, did this new model do better or do worse? We looked at writing prompts for agents and how having more specialized agents, especially through something like the OpenAI SDK, can be better rather than having like one mega system message for an agent. And this is kind of what I think will be more of the trend going forward. Agents are obviously very powerful and very here to stay, but in terms of prompting, I think you'll see a lot of setups where we're having, rather than just one agent having, 7, 10, and they all have very specific instructions or very specific tools. And then maybe we're providing them with very specific context through MCP. And that is it for today. So again, discount code for new customers, I think it's 20% off for their first month, Prompt Lab 2025. The badges for completing this will be uploaded to your account next week. You get an email about that most likely. And then, we'd love to kind of continue along. I love talking with people about these things. We post a lot about this on LinkedIn and things along those lines. So feel free to connect with me there if you have any other like further questions too. That's a good place to get in touch with me and follow along with whatever we're kind of up to next. But thanks to you guys for coming. It was a ton of fun. We love doing these. We might do some more in the future, so we'll ping you in that if that's the case. We have a couple extra minutes to spare, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Thanks to all you guys, and thank you for the thanks. This is really a lot of fun. And Raj, since we do have a minute, we can go over that image thing here. Thanks, Kevin. Thank you, Andre. Thanks, Floor, Anja. Thank you, guys. So Raj, so if you wanted to upload an image, you just hit this button. I'm not going to click this button because it'll pull up my Finder right now, and I have some confidential stuff in there. But basically, create a prompt or a project, do it from scratch if you want, and then basically click this button, and then it will allow you to input PNGs, JPEGs, PDFs, so on and so forth. Suzanne, thanks for joining, and thanks for all the support that you always give on LinkedIn. That's super helpful. And Raj, you can connect with me too, and like if you're running into issues, you can let me know. Yeah, that'll be pretty straightforward. You just need to make sure you have an image model enabled. There's like some warnings if you don't. That's like the only thing. All right. Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks again. We'll have these uploaded soon. You'll hear from us. Connect with me. Stay in touch, and we will talk soon. See ya.